Oliver Whitmore, 50 years old, worth 800 million, was dining in London's most exclusive restaurant when a blind 10-year-old girl approached his table. "Excuse me, sir," she said, with a trembling voice. "Are you my father?" The silence in the restaurant was deafening. Oliver stared at her in shock. This girl had his same eyes, the same chin, the same smile he saw in the mirror every morning. "Who told you I'm your father?" he asked, with a hoarse voice. "Mummy, before she died, she told me my father is the richest man in London, but also the loneliest." In that moment, Oliver understood that his life was about to change forever. This girl wasn't just his daughter, but carried with her a secret that would destroy everything he thought he knew about himself. The restaurant, the Observatory, on the 40th floor of the Whitmore Tower, was the temple of London's gastronomy, where each table cost more than a worker's annual salary, and where only the capital's elite could afford to dine. The panoramic windows offered a breathtaking view of illuminated London, from Big Ben to the London Eye, while the atmosphere was that muted kind that surrounds power and money when they make no noise. Oliver Whitmore sat at his table reserved for 15 years, dressed in a £5,000 Savile Row suit that perfectly fitted his imposing figure. At 50, he was Britain's richest and most feared man. His property empire stretched from London to Edinburgh, with luxury flats in Mayfair, office towers in Canary Wharf, and seaside resorts along the Cornwall coast. His companies employed 50,000 people. His investments moved billions in international markets. But behind this facade of success hid a deeply lonely man who had sacrificed everything on the altar of ambition. That November evening, Oliver dined alone as always, reading financial documents while enjoying beef Wellington prepared by Europe's finest chef. His attention was completely absorbed by the numbers when an unusual movement caught his eye. A girl was moving between the restaurant tables with uncertain steps, guided by a white cane that gently tapped the marble floor. The girl was about 10 years old, chestnut hair plaited in 2 simple braids, wearing a white dress that was clean but clearly from Marks & Spencer, rather than the boutiques of Bond Street. What struck Oliver was the determination with which she moved, despite her obvious blindness. Her blue eyes, protected by dark glasses, seemed to be searching for something with a confidence that contrasted with her apparent fragility. The restaurant waiters were in evident confusion. How was it possible that a child alone, moreover blind, had entered London's most exclusive establishment? The maitre d's exchanged worried glances while the girl continued her search, immune to the luxury surrounding her. The Waterford crystal chandeliers, original Turner paintings, Royal Worcester, China service. Oliver observed the scene with a mixture of curiosity and irritation. He was accustomed to absolute perfection in his restaurant, and this anomalous situation disturbed him. He was about to call the maitre d' when she stopped in front of his table, as if guided by an invisible GPS. Oliver's heart stopped for a moment. Although she couldn't see him, the girl had turned towards him with impossible precision. It was as if she had sensed his presence, his breathing, his energy. The silence in the restaurant became palpable while all present, businessmen, politicians, aristocrats, turned to watch this surreal scene. The girl raised her face towards Oliver, and for a moment he had the impression she was truly looking into his eyes, despite the dark glasses. When she spoke, her voice was clear and determined, but betrayed a vulnerability that broke something inside Oliver's chest. "Excuse me, sir. Are you my father?" The silence that followed those 6 words was deafening. Oliver looked carefully at the girl's face, and an icy shiver ran down his spine. Those blue eyes, though blind, were identical to his own. Her chin had the same square shape he saw every morning in the mirror of his Belgravia mansion. Even the way she tilted her head slightly when waiting for an answer was a gesture Oliver recognized as his own, inherited from his Yorkshire grandfather. Oliver's voice came out hoarse and trembling when he finally managed to speak. Who told you I'm your father?" The girl smiled with a sweetness that contrasted dramatically with the sterile atmosphere of the luxury restaurant. "Mummy, before she died 3 months ago, she told me my father was the richest man in London, but also the loneliest. She said I could recognize him by the smell of his Tom Ford cologne and by the voice that trembles when he's moved, like now." Tycoon. Oliver realized that indeed his voice was trembling, and the cologne he always wore filled the air around the table. How could this girl know such precise details? And above all, who was her mother? "What's your name?" he managed to ask with a thread of voice. "Sophie Thompson. My mother was called Emma Thompson." Oliver's world collapsed in an instant. Emma Thompson. The name he had tried to forget for 11 years. The woman he had loved passionately before ambition dragged him away from her. Emma, the primary school teacher at St. Mary's School in Whitechapel, whom he had left without explanation when he discovered she was pregnant. Too proud to tell him. Too hurt by his wrong priorities. Oliver looked at Sophie with new eyes and finally saw the truth that should have been evident from the first moment. This girl wasn't just his daughter. She was all that remained of the only woman he had truly loved. The woman he had abandoned in a flat in Camden to pursue a dream of wealth that now, in front of his daughter, seemed completely empty. Oliver led Sophie out of the restaurant, away from the curious gazes of London's high society. They walked in silence through the streets of Mayfair, she with her white cane, he completely shaken by the revelation that had just changed his world forever. They sat on a bench in Hyde Park, under the street lamps that dimly illuminated the autumn trees. Oliver watched his daughter, for he no longer doubted that she was, while she told him the story he had been waiting for 11 years without knowing it. Emma had worked as a special needs teacher at a state school in Whitechapel. After Oliver left her, she had discovered she was pregnant, but her pride had prevented her from seeking him out. "Mummy said a man who chooses money over love once will always do it," Sophie explained with that precocious wisdom that impressed Oliver. They had lived in a small 2-bedroom flat in Camden High Street, near Regent's Park. Emma had worked miracles with her civil servant's salary, private tutoring in the afternoons, marking papers at night, weekend work translating documents, all to ensure Sophie had the best within her possibilities. "Mummy never complained," Sophie continued, "but I heard her cry at night when she thought I was sleeping. She said your name in her dreams, Oliver. Always, Oliver." The tears that Oliver hadn't shed for 20 years began to flow down his face. Emma had continued loving him all those years, raising a blind girl alone, fighting against life with the dignity of strong London women, those who don't bend even under the weight of the world. Sophie had been born blind due to a complication during birth. The doctors at Great Ormond Street Hospital had done everything possible, but couldn't save her sight. Emma had blamed herself for months, but then had transformed that guilt into iron determination. Her daughter would be independent, strong, capable of conquering the world despite her disability. She had taught her to move around London with the confidence of a born Londoner. She knew how to navigate the Tube, recognized each borough by its characteristic sounds, could travel alone from Whitechapel to Westminster using only public transport. Emma had turned the city into her daughter's playground, her personal university of life. "When Mummy got ill," Sophie continued with a broken voice, "she didn't tell me anything until the end. Only in the last days, when she could no longer hide the pain, did she confess she had pancreatic cancer. She had been fighting alone for months, going to chemotherapy between lessons, taking morphine secretly so I wouldn't notice." Oliver felt a stab in his chest. Emma had died alone, without support, carrying to the end the weight of a dignity he had scorned years before to pursue success. "In the last moments," Sophie whispered, "Mummy gave me this." From her small cloth bag, the girl took out a yellowed envelope, worn by the hands that had held it for months. She handed it to Oliver with sure movements, guided by that instinct that allowed her to navigate the world without sight. Oliver opened the letter with trembling hands. Emma's handwriting, that round and elegant script he had loved, filled 3 pages of cheap paper. He began to read under the yellowish light of the street lamp. "My dearest Oliver, if you're reading this letter, it means I've died, and our daughter has found you. Yes, Sophie is your daughter. She was born 9 months after you left me, but I never told you because your goodbye was so final that I understood you didn't want to know anything about me or what we could have built together. Forgive me for depriving you of 11 years of her life. I was young, proud, and afraid you'd see her as a burden. But now that I'm dying, I understand I made a mistake. Sophie needs to know where she comes from. And you need to know what kind of man you are when you love unconditionally. Our daughter was born blind, but don't let that make you think she's fragile. She's the strongest person I know. She sees with her heart what others can't see with their eyes. She'll recognize you immediately because she has your same determination, your same ability to go straight to the target. I've followed your career all these years. I know you became Britain's richest man, but I also know you live alone in that enormous mansion. I always hoped that one day you'd realize that all that wealth means nothing if you don't have someone to share it with. Oliver, I ask you with the last breath of life I have left, take care of our girl. Teach her that love isn't weakness, but the greatest strength in the world, and allow her to teach you that loving is the only way to be truly rich. I loved you from the first day, and will love you until the last. Emma. Oliver folded the letter with hands that trembled like leaves in a storm. He looked at Sophie, who was waiting in silence, and realized that for the first time in 20 years, he didn't know what to say, what to do, how to react. He had built a financial empire, but had no idea how to embrace his own daughter. It was Sophie who took the initiative. She approached him on the bench and put her small hands on his face, as if to see him through touch. She smiled with that sweetness she had inherited from Emma. "Mummy was right. You have the saddest eyes I've ever felt. They're the eyes of someone who has everything, but has nothing." Oliver could no longer hold back the tears. For the first time since he was 12 years old, he cried without shame, embracing this girl who was all that remained of his lost heart, under the stars of London that seemed to be silent witnesses to a miracle. Oliver brought Sophie to his mansion in Belgravia, a Georgian residence he had bought for $12 million and restored with obsessive perfection. As they walked through salons decorated with antiques and artworks worth fortunes, Oliver realized for the first time how cold and impersonal everything around him was. Sophie walked beside him, exploring with her hands and other senses her new world. She delicately touched the marble surfaces, perceived the echoes their footsteps created in the high ceilings, breathed in the artificial scent of flowers that a company changed 3 times a week. She made no comments, but Oliver sensed that this girl, raised in 2 rooms full of love in Camden, felt lost amidst so much soulless luxury. "It's a very big house," Sophie commented diplomatically. "Mummy always said that houses that are too big make you feel lonely because hugs get lost in so much space." Oliver stopped abruptly. Emma was right, as always. This mansion was a mausoleum of his loneliness, a monument to his inability to build true human relationships. Every room was perfect, but empty, like a museum where he was simultaneously the curator and the only exhibit. The room he prepared for Sophie had been the guest room, an elegant space with mahogany furniture, silk curtains, and a 4-poster bed that seemed to come from a 5-star hotel. Sophie sat on the edge and smiled melancholically. "Could I have the photo of Mummy that I always kept on my bedside table?" Oliver realized that everything Sophie possessed in the world fit into a cardboard suitcase, tied with string, and a cloth bag that Emma had sewn by hand. He opened the suitcase and found few clothes, all clean but clearly mended with love, some books in Braille, a teddy bear that had seen better days, and, wrapped in a cotton handkerchief, a framed photo. It was Emma smiling while holding baby Sophie. Oliver was breathless seeing the woman he had loved in her role as mother. Radiant, despite the tiredness. Beautiful, despite the worries. Complete, despite being alone. He placed the photo on the bedside table and realized that this single image gave more warmth to the room than all his designer furniture. In the following days, Oliver tried to adapt his routine life to Sophie's presence. He hired London's best governess, enrolled the girl in the capital's most exclusive private school, filled her room with expensive toys and advanced technology for the blind. But something wasn't working. Sophie was polite and grateful, never complained, always said, "Thank you, Daddy," with that melodious voice. But Oliver perceived a deep sadness he couldn't dispel with all his money. The girl spent hours motionless in the garden, as if waiting for something that never came. One evening, Oliver found her crying silently in her luxury room. He sat awkwardly on the edge of the bed, not knowing how to console a 10-year-old girl. "What can I do to make you feel better? Would you like me to buy you something? Shall we go on holiday?" Sophie dried her tears and looked at him with those blue eyes that seemed to pierce through him. "I don't need expensive things, Daddy. Mummy and I had nothing, but we were happy because we loved each other very much." "Do you love me?" The question hit Oliver like a hammer blow to the chest. He realized that in all those weeks he had tried to demonstrate his affection through costly objects, but had never told Sophie he loved her. He had never hugged her spontaneously, never done anything a real father does. "I love you more than my own life," he confessed with a broken voice, "but I don't know how to be a daddy. I never had time to learn." Sophie put a hand on his cheek with that tender gesture she had inherited from Emma. "Mummy said that loving isn't learned from books. It's learned by loving, day by day, mistake after mistake." That night, Oliver couldn't sleep. He realized he had conquered the business world, but had lost the only thing that really mattered, the ability to build a family. He had Sophie, but risked losing her as he had lost Emma, because he didn't know how to be anything other than a provider of luxuries instead of a present father. The next morning, he made the bravest decision of his life. He canceled all meetings, dismissed the governess, sent the domestic staff home. He remained alone with Sophie in the too-large mansion and told her, "It's time we learn together what it means to be a family." They started with the most basic thing, the kitchen. Sophie offered to teach him how to prepare shepherd's pie, the dish she most liked making with Emma. Oliver, accustomed to professional chefs preparing gastronomic delicacies for him, found himself discovering the authentic taste of simple ingredients cooked with love. "The secret," Sophie explained while guiding him step by step, "is to put affection into each ingredient. It doesn't matter if it comes out perfect. What matters is that you make it thinking of the person who's going to eat it." Oliver burned the first 3 attempts, but when he finally managed to prepare a decent dish, the taste of that simple shepherd's pie seemed better than any delicacy he had tried in the world's most expensive restaurants. It wasn't the food that moved him, it was the process, being beside his daughter, hearing her laughter when he made mistakes, feeling how something was gradually building between them that no money could buy. That first meal they prepared together, sitting in the enormous kitchen he had never used, was the beginning of a new life, a life where the most valuable things had no price. Good-night hugs, conversations before sleep, the simple pleasure of being together without needing words. For the first time in 20 years, Oliver felt truly rich. The following months were a complete revolution in Oliver's life. The man who had directed multinational companies with the precision of a Swiss watch found himself learning the delicate rhythms of a 10-year-old girl who needed attentions that couldn't be solved with platinum credit cards. Sophie became his life teacher in ways he could never have imagined. The first great lesson came when she suggested going for walks through London as she used to do with Emma every Sunday. Oliver, accustomed to moving exclusively in his Bentley with chauffeur, discovered a completely new city through his daughter's senses. London has 1,000 different voices, Sophie explained to him as they walked down Oxford Street. The city smells of coffee and hurry. Camden smells of youth and music. Hyde Park smells of damp earth and peace. Oliver realized he had lived 50 years in this city without ever noticing its sensory richness. Always enclosed in his armored glass bubble, Sophie taught him to listen to London, the different sound of footsteps on the cobblestones of Covent Garden versus the asphalt of Piccadilly Circus, the particular echo of voices in the Westminster Tube Station, the characteristic murmur of the Thames fountains. "When you can't see," she explained, with that precocious wisdom that always surprised him, "you learn that the world is full of music that sighted people don't hear." The second great lesson came when Sophie fell ill with a simple flu that became complicated for her due to her delicate constitution. Oliver, who had handled financial crises worth millions of pounds with absolute coldness.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
Found himself facing a terror that paralyzed him, the fear of losing his daughter. He spent 3 sleepless nights beside her bed, checking her temperature every hour, making sure she took her medicines, holding her hand when shivers made her tremble. In those moments, he understood for the first time what it meant to love someone more than one's own life. He would have traded his entire empire to see Sophie smile again. "Why are you crying, Daddy?" Sophie asked him one night when the fever had finally dropped. "I'm fine. It was just a cold." "I'm afraid of losing you," Oliver confessed. "I'm afraid of not knowing how to take care of you like Emma knew how to do." Sophie caressed his cheek with those little hands that had already learned to comfort him. "Mummy was sometimes afraid too, but she said that love isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid, but staying anyway. You stayed, Daddy. That means you really love me." The third lesson was the deepest. One afternoon, while they were preparing together their now famous shepherd's pie, Sophie asked him a question that changed his perspective forever. "Daddy, do you think there are other children like me who don't have a daddy or mummy?" Oliver stopped stirring. "I suppose so. Why?" "Mummy always said that when you learn to be happy, you have to teach others to be happy too. We have this such big house and so much love that we're learning to use. Don't you think we could share it?" In that moment, Oliver understood that his daughter, at 10 years old, had grasped something it had taken him 50 years to discover, that true happiness doesn't come from accumulating, but from sharing. This extraordinary girl was showing him the path to a kind of wealth he had never considered. "What do you have in mind?" he asked, though he already intuited the answer. "We could do like Mummy did with me. She taught me that it doesn't matter if you're different. What matters is that someone loves you exactly as you are. There are blind children like me, or with other difficulties, who are alone in orphanages. We could be their family." Oliver looked at his daughter and realized he had before him not just a 10-year-old girl, but a teacher of humanity. Emma had raised not just a daughter, but a little revolutionary of love, capable of transforming pain into compassion, her own experience into service to others. That night, after putting Sophie to bed, Oliver stayed awake until dawn, planning something he had never imagined, transforming his empty mansion into a home full of life, his loneliness into a chosen family, his material wealth into human wealth. The next day, while they had crumpets for breakfast that they had learned to make together, Oliver said to Sophie, "I've been thinking about your idea. You're right. This house is too big for 2 people alone. Would you like us to start looking for brothers and sisters?" Sophie's smile was so radiant that Oliver felt as if the sun had risen twice that morning. "Really, Daddy? Are we really going to have a big family?" "The biggest and most loving in all of London," Oliver promised, knowing he had just made the most important decision of his life. Emma, wherever she was, must have been smiling proudly at the extraordinary woman her daughter was becoming, and at the new man, the father she had found, too late, but just in time had transformed into. 1 year after that encounter that changed everything, Oliver's mansion in Belgravia was completely unrecognizable. The cold and silent salons had transformed into lively spaces where the voices of 12 children echoed. Children who had found there not just a roof, but a true family. Oliver had officially founded the Emma Thompson Family Center, in honor of the woman who had taught him the true meaning of love through her daughter's legacy. The mansion now housed children and teenagers who were blind or had visual impairments and had been abandoned or lost their families. Sophie, now 11 years old, had become the soul of the house. Despite being one of the youngest, she had naturally assumed the role of big sister, guiding newcomers with that practical wisdom she had learned from Emma. Her blindness, which many would have seen as a limitation, had revealed itself as a superpower that allowed her to understand other children's fears and insecurities better than anyone else. There was James, 14 years old, who had arrived angry and rebellious after losing his sight in a cricket accident. Sophie had been the only one capable of breaking through his defenses, teaching him that anger doesn't heal wounds, but love does. Now James played guitar with a passion that moved everyone, composing songs about second chances. There was also Lucy, 9 years old, blind from birth like Sophie, who had arrived shy and frightened from the Oxford orphanage. Sophie had taught her to move around the house, to recognize each brother by his voice, not to be afraid to explore the world with her hands. Now Lucy cooked with Oliver and was famous throughout the house for her Victoria sponge cake, which tasted exactly like her grandmother's before she died. And there was Tom, 12 years old, who had lost his sight due to illness and had completely withdrawn into himself. Sophie had had infinite patience with him, sitting beside him for hours without demanding anything, simply accompanying him in his silence, until gradually he had started to speak, to laugh, to be a child again. Oliver had also radically transformed his professional life. He had sold several of his less ethical companies, delegated daily management to trusted managers, and devoted most of his time and resources to the family center. He had discovered that running a family was infinitely more complex and rewarding than running a corporation. Each child had their story of pain, but also their unique talents. Oliver had learned to see beyond disabilities, discovering extraordinary abilities. Anna's prodigious memory, which retained every conversation word for word. David's perfect musical ear, capable of tuning instruments with absolute precision. Paula's emotional sensitivity, which perceived others' moods before they themselves noticed. The most surprising transformation, however, had occurred in Oliver himself. The ruthless executive had become a father who cried with emotion when one of his children overcame an obstacle, who spent sleepless nights when someone was ill, who celebrated every small victory as if it were the conquest of the world. His former partners from the financial world couldn't recognize him. Oliver Whitmore, the British shark of Wall Street, now organized birthday parties, helped with maths homework, read bedtime stories, and knew by heart each of his 12 children's favorite songs. The most significant change was seen on the day of the first anniversary of Sophie's arrival. Oliver organized a big party in the mansion's garden, not with luxury catering, but with food they had all prepared together. Enormous shepherd's pies, fish and chips, bangers and mash, and Victoria sponge. He invited not businessmen or politicians, but teachers, therapists, other children from special schools, and families who had adopted his house's model. While watching his 12 children play in the garden, some running guided by others, some making music, some simply laughing under the London sun, Oliver remembered the day he had met Sophie at the observatory. It had been only a year before, but it seemed like another life. A year before, he had been Britain's richest and loneliest man. Now he was still rich, but no longer alone. He had discovered that true wealth isn't measured in pounds, but in hugs, not in properties, but in smiles, not in power, but in shared love. Every evening, when all the children said goodnight with a "Good night, Daddy," he felt richer than when he closed deals worth hundreds of millions. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Oliver and Sophie sat in the garden as they did every Sunday. It was their special moment when she told him the thoughts of the week, and he spoke to her about projects for the family center. "Do you think Mummy would be proud of what we've built?" Sophie asked, leaning on her father's shoulder. Oliver looked at the stars above London and smiled. "I'm sure she's very proud of you, and I hope she's forgiven me for all the lost years." "Seek, Mummy always said that past mistakes are fixed with present love," Sophie replied, with that wisdom that continued to surprise him. "And you've put so much love in this house that there's no room left for mistakes." Oliver embraced his daughter and realized he had finally found what he had been searching for all his life without knowing it. A family built not on blood or money, but on the conscious and daily decision to love one another. The Emma Thompson Family Center had become something greater than just a residence for children with disabilities. It was living proof that love multiplies everything it touches, that a family can be born from choice and not just destiny, that the greatest wealth in the world is having someone waiting for you at dinner. And at the center of everything, like a lighthouse guiding everyone towards happiness, stood Sophie, the blind girl who had given sight back to her father, teaching him to see what really matters in life. 5 years had passed since that night at the observatory that forever changed the destiny of two souls meant to find each other. Sophie, now 15 years old, had become an extraordinary young woman. Brilliant student, talented pianist, and above all, the beating heart of a family that had grown to 25 members. The Emma Thompson Family Center had evolved into an international model. Delegations from across Europe came to London to study the innovative methods they had developed for integrating young people with visual impairments. But for Oliver and Sophie, the greatest success remained the family dinners, where 25 voices recounted the day's adventures. Oliver, now 55 years old, had found a serenity he had never known in his years as a ruthless businessman. His hair had silver threads, but his face radiated a peace that made him look younger. He had learned that true youth comes from the heart, not the calendar. All the first children had grown extraordinarily. James, now 19, had won a scholarship to study music at the Royal Academy of Music and composed songs that moved international audiences. Lucy, 14, had opened a cooking blog followed by thousands of people, proving that passion knows no barriers. Tom had become an example of overcoming adversity, helping other newly arrived children with that infinite patience he had learned from Sophie. But the most moving story was that of Grace, a 6-year-old girl who had arrived at the family center just 6 months before. She had lost her sight and her parents in the same car accident, and had retreated into total mutism that worried all the specialists. Sophie had personally taken on Grace's case with that gentle determination she had inherited from Emma. "She's like I was when I arrived here," she had explained to Oliver. "She needs time to understand she can be happy again." For months, Sophie had dedicated hours each day to simply being present for Grace. She didn't ask her to speak, didn't try to force anything. She sat beside her, sometimes reading aloud, sometimes playing soft melodies on the piano, sometimes simply breathing in the same rhythm. The miracle came unexpectedly. It was a spring Sunday, and the whole family was in the mansion's garden preparing an enormous Sunday roast to celebrate James's birthday. Oliver was in the kitchen cutting vegetables when he heard something that made him stop. Grace's voice, clear and melodic, singing together with Sophie a lullaby that Emma used to hum. He ran out to the garden and saw the two girls sitting under the apple tree, Grace nestled in Sophie's arms, singing with a voice that hadn't been heard for months. All the other children had stopped playing to listen to this magical moment. "She's back," Sophie whispered, when she saw Oliver approaching with tears in his eyes. "Grace has come home." That night, during the family dinner, Grace spoke for the first time since her arrival. She told them she had felt lost in the darkness, but that Sophie had taught her that darkness isn't a place where you get lost, but a space where you learn to shine with your own light. Sophie taught me that when you can't see with your eyes, you can see with your heart, Grace explained, with that seriousness of children who have experienced too much pain for their age. And my heart saw that here was a family waiting for me. Oliver looked at his daughter, his first daughter, who had saved him from the emptiness of a meaningless life, and realized that Sophie had become what Emma had always been, a sower of hope, an architect of families, a teacher of unconditional love. After dinner, while the older children helped clean up and the little ones played in the lounge, Oliver and Sophie went to their special place, the garden bench where they sat every Sunday to talk under London's stars. "Do you know what day it is today?" Sophie asked, with that smile that was still capable of lighting up the entire world. "James's birthday," Oliver replied, though he sensed there was more. "It's also the 5th anniversary of the day we found each other," Sophie said, taking her father's hand. 5 years since a blind girl entered an elegant restaurant looking for her daddy. Oliver felt a lump in his throat. 5 years that had been the richest, most fulfilling, most meaningful of his entire life. 5 years in which he had learned that true success isn't measured in pounds earned, but in lives touched. Not in accumulated power, but in shared love. "I have a gift for you," Sophie continued, taking from her pocket an envelope that smelled faintly of Emma's perfume. "Another letter?" Oliver asked, remembering the letter that had changed his life 5 years before. "Mummy's last letter," Sophie explained. "She asked me to give it to you when we completed 5 years as a family. She said only then would you completely understand her message." With trembling hands, Oliver opened the envelope. It was a single page, with Emma's weaker but still recognizable handwriting. "Dearest Oliver, if you're reading this letter, it means 5 years have passed since Sophie found you. It means you've had time to learn to be a father, that you've discovered what kind of man you are when you love unconditionally, that you've finally understood which wealth really matters. I want you to know that I forgive you all the mistakes of the past. More than forgive you, I thank you. If you had stayed with me 15 years ago, you might have been a good husband, but you would never have become the extraordinary father I know you are now. Sometimes love separates us, so we can find each other better." Sophie was 5 years old when I wrote this letter, but I already knew she would be special. She asked me why I didn't look for her daddy, and I explained that sometimes people need time to grow until they're worthy of the love they deserve. She told me, "Then we'll wait until Daddy is ready to be the best daddy in the world." He's ready, Oliver. He's been ready since the day he chose Sophie over his loneliness, since the day he transformed his empty house into a home full of children, since the day he learned that being rich means being able to give love to those who need it most. Take care of our girl, take care of all your children, and take care of yourself. You're a better man than you ever imagined you could be. With eternal love, Emma. P.S. Tell Sophie I'm proud of the woman she's becoming, and tell her that the out-of-tune little piano I gave her when she was 4 belonged to my grandmother. It's time she had a new one, worthy of her talent. Oliver cried shamelessly under London's stars, with Sophie embracing him as she had done 5 years before in Hyde Park. But now they were different tears, not of pain for what was lost, but of infinite gratitude for what was found. The next day, Oliver took Sophie to London's best piano shop and bought her a Steinway grand piano that they installed in the mansion's main salon. That night, while Sophie played the keys of her new piano for the first time, the whole family gathered to listen. The music filled the spaces that had once been empty. The children sang songs that Emma would have taught them, and Oliver realized he had finally completed the perfect circle of love. He had received love from Emma, had learned to give love to Sophie. Sophie had multiplied that love by sharing it with all her siblings. And now, all together, they created a symphony of happiness that would resonate forever. The Emma Thompson Family Center wasn't just a place where children without families lived. It was living proof that love is the only force capable of transforming pain into joy, loneliness into community, emotional poverty into infinite wealth. And at the center of everything, like the sun around which all the planets of this family galaxy revolved, stood Sophie, the blind girl who had illuminated the path home for everyone who had lost hope of being loved. Emma, wherever she was, smiled, seeing her greatest legacy. Not just an extraordinary daughter, but an infinite family built on the unshakable foundation of unconditional love. If this story has shown you that love can transform even the coldest heart, smash that like button with all your strength. Share to prove that true family is built with love, not blood. Tell us in the comments, do you think Oliver deserved a second chance? Do you know stories of families born from love rather than blood ties? Which moment moved you the most? Subscribe now for more incredible stories of fathers and children who find each other, second chances, and proof that true love can change everything.